The day my daughter said, "Mom, we need to talk about your living situation," I knew exactly what she meant. And I also knew she was wrong. Not about me needing help, she was right about that, but about what kind of help I actually needed. Because what nobody tells you, what no brochure, no doctor, no well-meaning family member ever says, is that the loneliness doesn't come from living alone. It comes from feeling like you no longer have anything to give. There is something nobody prepares you for when you reach this age. Not the stiff knees in the morning, not the way a flight of stairs can suddenly feel like a negotiation. What nobody prepares you for is the moment the people who love you most begin to look at you like a problem that needs solving. When my daughter said those words, "Mom, we need to talk about your living situation," I heard everything underneath them. I heard the worry she had been carrying for months. I heard her rehearsing that sentence in the car on the way over. And I heard, beneath all of it, the quiet assumption that my chapter of deciding things for myself was coming to an end, and that the kindest thing she could do was help me find a soft place to land. She wasn't being cruel. I want to be very clear about that. She was being loving. But love, when it is frightened, sometimes reaches for the wrong answers. So we looked at the three options that everyone looks at: moving in with family, hiring help to come to the house, finding a facility, what they call assisted living, which sounds gentle and dignified until you are actually living inside one. These are the three doors that society offers you when you are old and beginning to struggle. And from the outside, each one looks like a solution, a real answer, a way forward. But here is what I learned after walking through all three of them, and I did walk through all three, which is why I can speak to you about this honestly, not from theory, but from the bruises. Every single one of those options is built around the same idea, the idea that what you need at this stage of life is to be taken care of, managed, supervised, kept safe, and safety, I will grant you, matters. I am not dismissing that. But when safety becomes the only thing anyone is designing for, something essential gets quietly removed from your life without anyone even noticing it is gone. What gets removed is your sense of still being someone who contributes, someone whose presence in a room adds something rather than requiring something. The moment you become only a recipient of care, of meals, of scheduled activities, of someone else's patience, you begin to disappear. Not from the world. You are still there, still breathing, still taking up space. But you disappear from your own life. And that kind of disappearing is slower and quieter and far more painful than any fall down a flight of stairs. I spent thousands of dollars and months of my life testing those three doors, and every time what I found on the other side was a version of the same room, one where I was being handled, however kindly, rather than known. You deserve to be known, not managed. I want to tell you about a particular kind of loneliness, not the loneliness of an empty house, where the silence at least belongs to you. Not the loneliness of a quiet Sunday when the phone does not ring. I want to tell you about the loneliness that finds you when you are sitting at a dinner table surrounded by your own family, people who share your blood, your history, your photographs on the wall, and you still feel like a guest who has overstayed her welcome. That is the loneliness nobody warns you about, and it is the cruelest kind. When I moved in with my daughter, the first week felt like a gift. There were meals together, there was conversation, there was the particular warmth of falling asleep in a house where other people are still awake, moving around, living. After months of silence in my own home, it felt like being handed something I had forgotten I was missing. but by the second week, the house had returned to its normal rhythm, and its normal rhythm did not include me. My daughter left for work before 8. Her husband left shortly after. The grandchildren had school, had friends, had the urgent and all-consuming business of being young. And I was there, in their house, in a bedroom that smelled of fresh paint and good intentions, with nowhere particular to be and no particular reason to be there. I would sit by the window and watch the neighborhood. I would make myself a cup of tea and try not to use too many dishes. I would turn the television down low because I was never quite sure who might be trying to concentrate somewhere else in the house. I was living at half volume, folding myself smaller and smaller so that my presence required as little of everyone as possible. And then one evening, I heard my daughter on the phone with her sister in the hallway. She did not know I could hear her, and she said quietly and tiredly, the way you speak when you are telling the truth to someone safe. I know it is the right thing to do, but honestly, it is exhausting. I cannot even go to the store without worrying about her. She was not a bad daughter. I need you to understand that before anything else. She was an honest one. She was a tired one. She was a woman with a full life who had opened her home out of love and was discovering, as people always do, that love alone cannot restructure an entire life around someone else's needs without cost. But I heard that sentence and something shifted inside me permanently, because I realized that I had done everything right by the world's definition. I had accepted help. I had not been proud. I had let my daughter take care of me the way everyone said I should, and the result was that I had become a weight she carried with tenderness, but carried nonetheless. That is not connection. That is obligation wearing the face of love. And the loneliness of being someone's obligation, of being present in a home where your existence creates invisible pressure, of being loved and burdensome at the same time, that loneliness hollowed me out far more efficiently than any empty house ever had. Because in my own house, the silence was mine. In her house, I was alone inside someone else's noise, and there is no lonelier place on this earth. I want to talk about money for a moment. Not because I enjoy the subject. At 83, I have had enough conversations about budgets and bills and what things cost to last several lifetimes, but because I made a very expensive mistake, and I would rather you learn it from me than from your own bank statement. When I came back home after leaving my daughter's house, I felt two things simultaneously. Relief, because I was back in my own space, surrounded by my own things, answerable to no one's schedule but my own. And fear, because the same problems that had worried everyone in the first place were still sitting there, waiting for me. The stairs were still steep. The jars were still stubborn. The light bulbs were still burning out in high places my hands could no longer safely reach. So I did what a practical person does. I found a solution. I hired help. A woman named Patricia came 3 times a week. She was efficient and capable and perfectly pleasant. And for a short while, it genuinely helped. Things got done. The house stayed clean. Meals were prepared. I told myself that this was the answer, that I had found the dignified middle ground between dependence and struggle. Then the bills arrived, $3,000 a month, every month, for part-time help. My Social Security covered perhaps a third of that, and I watched my savings, the careful accumulation of an entire working life, the money Richard and I had set aside with such discipline and such hope. I watched it drain away month after month like water through cupped hands. And I knew, with the particular clarity that comes from doing arithmetic at the kitchen table at midnight, that I could not sustain it. But the money was not even the worst part. The worst part was that I was still lonely. Patricia had her system for the dishes. She had her way of folding towels. She reorganized my kitchen cupboards in a way that made practical sense to her and made me feel like a visitor in my own home. Every time I reached for something and found it somewhere new, I was reminded that this was now a managed space, not simply my space. And when Patricia left, first temporarily, then permanently, family emergency, no notice, I had to start the whole process over again with someone new. Different habits, different preferences, different everything. I had to explain my life from the beginning to a stranger, again, for the third time, for the fourth. What I was paying for, I eventually understood, was the appearance of a solution. The service existed. Someone showed up. Tasks were completed. But the ledger of my loneliness was not reduced by a single entry. I had purchased efficiency and received nothing resembling warmth. And that is the distinction that I wish someone had explained to me before I spent all that money learning it myself. There is a profound difference between someone who helps you because you are paying them and someone who helps you because something real has grown between you. The first is a transaction. The second is a relationship. And no amount of money, arranged carefully and spent willingly and justified completely, can manufacture the second from the materials of the first. What I needed was not a service. What I needed was a reason to matter to someone. What I needed was the kind of help that flows naturally between people who have genuinely become part of each other's lives, where nothing is invoiced, nothing is scheduled, and nothing feels like charity, because it does not go only one direction. I found that eventually, but I found it 3 doors away, not in any agency's brochure. And it cost me nothing except the willingness to offer something first. Here is the expanded segment for Key Point 4, written as Margaret's voice. There is a story we tell about old age in this country, and I have come to believe it is one of the most damaging stories we have. It goes like this: you are young, and then you are useful, and then you are old, and then you wait. You wait comfortably, if you are lucky. You wait with good medical care, if you are fortunate. You wait surrounded by people who love you, if you are blessed. But the waiting, the fundamental repositioning of yourself from someone who acts upon the world to someone the world must now act upon, that part, the story insists, is simply inevitable. It is just what getting old means. I believed that story for a while. I am ashamed to admit it, but I did. After Richard died, after I had tried the 3 doors and found them all wanting, after the caregivers and the facility and my daughter's house and the slow draining of my savings, I sat in my living room one afternoon and I looked at my hands. These hands that had raised children and run a household and cooked 10,000 meals and held my husband's face and planted gardens and typed letters and done every quiet, unremarkable, essential thing that a life requires. And for the first time, I looked at them and thought, what are you for now? That thought is a dangerous one. I want to name it clearly so that if it has visited you, you will recognize it and not let it stay too long. Because it is not a truth. It is a lie that exhaustion tells you when you have been trying the wrong things for too long. Here is what is actually true. Age does not subtract from what you have to offer. It transforms it. The currency changes, but the wealth does not disappear. At 30, I had energy and speed, and the particular confidence of someone who has not yet been seriously wrong about anything important. At 83, I have something that 30-year-old Margaret could not have bought at any price. I have time. I have patience. I have the ability to sit with someone in their difficulty without immediately trying to fix it, because I have lived long enough to know that not everything can be fixed, and that presence is sometimes more valuable than solutions. I have 70 years of accumulated experience that tells me, with quiet authority, which problems are genuinely serious and which ones only feel that way at 2 in the morning. I have survived grief and financial worry and medical scares and the particular devastation of watching someone you love diminish slowly. I have come out the other side of things that would have destroyed my younger self. And all of that survival, all of that endurance, all of those hard and patient years, they did not leave me empty. They left me full of something that the world, in its youth and its hurry and its relentless forward motion, is quietly and desperately short of. They left me with wisdom, with steadiness, with the ability to listen without an agenda, with the knowledge that small things, a child walked safely home, a meal left on a doorstep, a phone call made to someone who no longer expects the phone to ring, are not small at all. They are, in fact, the entire substance of a life well lived. The crisis of aging is not that we run out of things to give. The crisis is that we stop believing we have anything worth giving. And once that belief takes hold, it becomes a kind of self-fulfilling diminishment. We withdraw. We wait. We shrink the circumference of our days until the world confirms what we feared, that we have become peripheral. But it is the withdrawal that creates the periphery, not the age. I picked up Emma from school on a Tuesday afternoon because I was walking past anyway, and a neighbor looked like she needed someone to notice. That is all it was. One small, unrequested gesture from a woman who had convinced herself she no longer had anything useful to offer the world. And from that single afternoon, an entire architecture of mutual care grew. One that restored to me something no facility and no caregiver and no well-meaning family arrangement had managed to give back. The feeling of being someone who matters, not because someone is paid to treat me that way, but because I did something first, and it was genuinely needed, and the world responded. Your age built you. It did not diminish you. And the moment you offer what only your particular years can offer, the world will show you exactly how much it still needs what you have. Here is the expanded segment for Key Point 5, written as Margaret's voice. Somewhere along the way, our society decided that aging was a binary condition. You are either fine or you are not fine. You are either managing independently or you need to be somewhere. You are either capable of everything or incapable of enough, and the moment you cross that invisible line, the moment the stairs become difficult or the driving becomes uncertain or the grocery bags become too heavy for your arms, the conversation immediately jumps to the largest, most permanent, most life-altering solutions available. Nobody talks about the enormous territory in between. And I want to talk about it, because I lived in that territory for a long time before I understood that it was not a temporary waiting room between independence and a facility. It was simply my life, a real life, a full life, one that required some adjusting, some honest acknowledging of what had changed, and some creativity about how to fill the gaps, but a life that was entirely, genuinely mine. Let me tell you what that middle ground actually looked like for me, because I think when people imagine accepting help at this age, they picture something dramatic. They picture a caregiver moving in. They picture a medical bed in the living room. They picture the slow, visible machinery of decline installed in the house like furniture that announces to every visitor exactly what is happening and exactly where it is heading. But that is not what the middle ground looks like at all. The middle ground looked like grocery delivery for the heavy things, the large bottles, the bulk bags, the items that had been quietly exhausting me for months because I was too proud to admit that carrying them 4 blocks home had become genuinely difficult. One small adjustment, My independence remained entirely intact. My refrigerator remained full. My dignity remained unquestioned. The middle ground looked like Emma being walked home from school on Tuesday afternoons. Not a formal arrangement with contracts and schedules and liability considerations. Just a neighbor's child and an old woman walking the same 3 blocks in the same direction and talking about second grade as if it were the most important subject in the world, because to Emma it was, and I was wise enough at 83 to understand that. The middle ground looked like Sarah's husband changing a light bulb that had defeated me. Not because I announced my limitations to the neighborhood, but because a relationship had grown naturally between our two households, the kind of relationship where small needs are noticed and addressed without ceremony, without the weight of obligation, without anyone needing to formally declare themselves either helper or helped. These are not compromises. I want to be very clear about that because I know how the word compromise sounds to someone who has spent 8 decades being thoroughly capable of everything. These are not concessions to decline. They are simply the intelligent architecture of a life that has changed shape, as all lives do, and been honestly redesigned to fit its current form rather than forcing itself into a shape that no longer serves it. We do not tell a 30-year-old that accepting a colleague's help on a difficult project is a sign of deterioration. We do not tell a 40-year-old that hiring someone to mow the lawn because work has become consuming is an admission of failure. We call those things practical. We call them wise. We call them the reasonable decisions of someone who understands their own priorities and arranges their life accordingly. And yet, the moment that same intelligent prioritization happens after the age of 70, we surround it with anxiety and euphemism and the persistent suggestion that it is the beginning of a longer, darker story. It does not have to be that story. Every concession you make to what your body now requires does not need to be a step on a staircase leading somewhere you do not want to go. Some of them are simply adjustments. Practical, sensible, entirely livable adjustments made by a person who is still very much in charge of her own life, still very much the author of her own days, still making decisions based on what she wants rather than what is being arranged for her. The middle ground is not a waiting room. It is not a lesser version of the life you had before. It is a different version, one that requires more honesty, more creativity, and more willingness to ask for small things before they become large crises. But it is livable. It is genuinely, quietly, surprisingly livable. And the moment I stopped trying to perform the full independence of my younger self and simply began designing the life that my current self actually needed, that was the moment I stopped being afraid of what was coming and started being present in what already was. Here is the expanded segment for Key Point 6, written as Margaret's voice. I want to tell you something that took me far too long to understand. And I say that not to be hard on myself. I have reached an age where self-criticism feels like a poor use of whatever time remains, but because I think the same blindness lives in many of us. And I would rather name it plainly so that you can see past it sooner than I did. The answer to my loneliness, to my isolation, to the quiet daily erosion of feeling like someone who still belonged in the world, that answer was not in any brochure. It was not behind any of the 3 doors that well-meaning people kept opening for me and gesturing toward with such patient, worried faces. It was not available for $3,000 a month or discoverable through any agency or accessible through any system that society had designed for people in my situation. It was 3 doors down the street. It was a woman I had nodded to for 2 years without ever really stopping. A woman I knew only well enough to recognize her stress, her rushing, her particular brand of quietly overwhelmed that working mothers carry in their shoulders and around their eyes. I knew her name. I knew she had a daughter. I knew she worked long hours. And for 2 years, that was the entire sum of what existed between us, because I had not yet understood that the distance between a neighbor and a lifeline is almost always smaller than it appears and almost always crossable with something far simpler than we imagine. One sentence crossed it. One unrehearsed, unplanned, completely spontaneous sentence offered to a woman on a sidewalk who looked like she needed someone to notice her. "Excuse me, Sarah. If you ever need someone to pick up your daughter from school, I walk past there every day anyway." That was all. No grand gesture, no formal proposal, no carefully considered plan developed over weeks of deliberation. Just an old woman with time on her hands and eyes open enough to see that the person standing 3 feet away had a problem that she happened to be positioned to help solve. And I want you to sit with that for a moment, because I think many of us, when we imagine finding community at this age, picture something that requires far more than we currently have. We picture joining organizations and attending events and putting ourselves into rooms full of strangers and performing a version of sociability that frankly exhausts us just to think about. We picture the large, structured, effortful version of connection, and we look at our energy levels and our confidence and our reluctance to impose on anyone, and we decide quietly that it is probably not for us. But that is not what happened on that sidewalk. What happened on that sidewalk was nothing more than paying attention to the specific texture of the life happening directly around me. Not the world in general, not strangers across the city, not some abstract community I needed to locate and apply to join. The life happening on my street, outside my window, 3 blocks to the school and 3 blocks back, in the ordinary, unremarkable geography of my own daily existence. Your Sarah is somewhere in that geography right now. I genuinely believe that. Not because I am an optimist by nature. At 83, optimism requires more evidence than it once did, but because I have read the letters and the messages from people who watched my story and then looked up from their screens and looked around at the lives adjacent to their own. And what they found again and again was that the need was already there. The opportunity was already present. The person whose problem matched their particular ability to help was already within walking distance, already nodding to them on the street, already existing in the thin margin between stranger and neighbor, where all real community eventually begins.